What's going on, everyone? John Magix here. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into some 40k here with Scholar's Lore, as we're going to check out the Leagues of Votann. The new, not a new faction. I was going to say it's a new faction. It's a new faction to me, because I've not really gotten into the Votann lore all that much. All I really know is they're basically kind of like space dwarves, and I think they tie their ancestry back to humanity before, you know, the dark age of technology happened and the, you know, all that stuff, and they were what's the word I'm looking for? It's not exiled, but essentially they lost contact with humanity, with Terra, essentially, from all that. So looking forward to learning about them and what they're all about, because they're a fact. I feel like I think they're with the, well, I was gonna say I think they're the newest faction in 40k, but I think that's actually not true. I think it's Tau, right? But I just haven't really heard them talked about much in general in the 40k universe. So looking forward to seeing what they're all about. Links will be down below as always to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the Scholar's Lore's channel. Please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video, be sure to go over there and give it a like. And if you enjoyed the Scholar's Lore content, be sure to go over there and show the man some love and hit that sub button on his channel. So yeah, we're just gonna jump in this here video, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen of the world. Again, the Leagues of Votann, an overview of Warhammer 40k lore by the Scholar's Lore. Let's do it.
To my dearest friends, I am honored to welcome you back once more for another foray into the grim darkness of the far future. Through our travels, we have looked over empires great and small, of species young and old, and even of the many curious phenomena which have come to define this ancient galaxy. But whilst most factions would seek to expand and bolster themselves wherever possible, there exists one region which has thus far repelled almost all attempted ventures, and this place could only be of the galactic core. It is a most treacherous zone, buffeted by gravitational forces so immense that planets and stars will often be ripped from their orbit, only to be cast out into the void to be lost forevermore. Yet, where many have tried, there is only one group which has ever been able to wrangle control over this turbulent realm, and they
already look like, basically, they already look like Space Marines, right? Like this, they look like just dwarf version of like fantasy dwarf Space Marines. I'm already digging this.
They would be known as the Leagues of Votann. This humanoid race, who refer to themselves as the Kin, moved to claim the roiling vortex of the core in a bygone age, but they were not dissuaded by its hellish swell. Instead, the determined little explorers embraced the challenges of the void, and as they withstood the constant storms, they were to settle upon the first worlds of what would eventually become a new stellar empire. For thousands of years, they were content to simply mine out the resource-rich worlds of their territory, and in truth they remained in a rather secretive position to the wider galaxy.
Digging up that mithril, you know what I'm saying?
Very few were ever aware of their presence, and whilst there were always rumors afloat of a species of squats, it was only due to the manifestation of the cicatrix maledictum which forced them out of isolation. And
now, I'm curious, in the 40k universe, do the Votann, like, do they find the term squats offensive? Like, you know, the Eldar refer to you know, humans as monkais, basically monkeys, right? You know, so I'm just curious, like, do people call the Votann squats out of like that, like, used as a derogatory term in the 40k universe?
into the limelight of the 41st millennium. Since they have emerged to mingle and clash with the various species of the galaxy, we have come to learn a great deal about their once shrouded civilization. And so today, my dearest friends, I shall share an overview to their rather densely packed empire.
Now, if it's true that these guys are offsprings of humanity, I would think the Imperium stance with them is that they would want to bring them back into the fold, right? Because they are essentially kin of humanity, even though I guess over however many millennia of evolution they might have had from, I assume because they're closer to the galactic core and gravity has had, you know, denser and had a bigger effect on them. That's why they're kind of shorter and stockier in the 40k universe. I assume that's the case, you know, but I guess technically they still trace their legacy back to humanity. So I would think the Imperium stance with them would be to want to either bring them back on the fold or destroy them, pretty much like with anything else. Like, what was that faction in the first Horus Heresy book that was fascinating that they ran into towards the end after they were fighting the like death arachnids or whatever on that planet Death, I think is literally what it was called. I can't remember their name, but essentially that's kind of the same thing, right? They were an another offshoot of humanity that had evolved and technologically advanced in their own way that had been split off from Earth. And yeah, the Interrex, that's what it is, the Interrex. So, and you know, that played out with them, ended up going to war essentially through various things, namely Erebus, because everything leads back to Erebus just being a dick, you know. So I would assume the same thing would play out here overall when the Imperium, you know, comes in contact with them. They'd either try to bring them into the fold, and if they don't want to, they'd probably end up trying to just go to war with them and destroy them.
Firstly, as I so often do, I will go over the story of their origin, ranging from their first colonial efforts through to their current position within the galactic core. After, we can begin to peel away the layers of their society, learning of how they live on a day-to-day basis, and of their rather fascinating technologies, including the all-knowing machine intelligences, named as the Ancestor Cores. Once we are a little more aware...
Yeah, so I guess the little bit of lore that I know about them from listening to that recent podcast that Ricky was talking about, they got into the Votann a little bit. I guess, like, their society is run by STCs, essentially, right? Like, they worship them. So that would be another reason why the Imperium would really love to get their hands on anything the Votann have, right? Because, like, this is essentially technology from the Dark Age of technology and STCs, you know, that are still functional, even though they've been running nonstop for, you know, 20, 30,000 years, however long it's been. You know, I think Bricky put it to the point where it's like they've been running so long that they've got like 90,000 Google tabs open. And so they're just kind of starting to malfunction because, you know, they haven't been reset or maintained properly in forever. All my homies hate Erebus. Yeah, they do. Everything that ever goes wrong in the 40k universe, it all leads back to Erebus. But anyway, let's continue.
Of their culture, we will move on to our final topic, which will be of their diplomatic stance towards the various species of the galaxy, and of why they may be forced to put down their tools and answer the calls for war. But now, it must be time for us to begin. We must journey through to the impenetrable heart of our galaxy, but if we do indeed look closely, then around those treasured worlds and newborn stars we will be sure to find the Leagues of Votann.
Dun, dun, dun!
To begin with the history of the Votann, we must understand that there are parts of their historical tale which are not entirely founded in truth, and rather they are simple myths, which the kin have maintained out of a sense of respect. Thus, as we progress through the early timeline of their faction and move away from their self-proclaimed fable, certain terms or aspects of the story will change in their meaning. Most notably, they will first name the Votann as the early biological ancestors of their kind. Yet, as we will soon learn, this name actually refers to their great machine intelligences. But in any case, I will explicitly mention when these shifts later occur during our story. Though the kin do seek to preserve their ancient tales, they themselves will acknowledge that these stories cannot possibly account for the entirety of their history. Also, if a story seems to be just slightly too far-fetched to believe, then they will chalk it up as a simple tale which should hardly be considered as an authentic and reliable source of knowledge.
Okay.
Similarly, as with any civilization...
So, I mean, it sounds like they're not 100% sure of their ancestry, and they at least seem to have kind of the mindset of, if it's not something that can 100% be proven and it sounds far-fetched, then they just kind of chalk it up to a fairy tale or a myth. Okay.
There are parts of their historical timeline which have fallen into obscurity. Yet the kin feel no need to fabricate false tales of an emperor-like figure, as would most assuredly be performed by some of the archaeohistorians back within the Imperium. But now, according to their own fable, their empire of the Leagues of Votann was originally named after a group of mysterious primordial beings known as the First Ancestors, or more commonly, as the Votann.
You know, the one thing that I find that would be interesting if they, I don't think Games Workshop would ever do it right. They've always kind of kept the way they explain how, like, chaos factions in both the fantasy and 40k worlds are the same but different, is that it's basically like essentially different universes kind of a thing, like it's a multiverse situation. But it would be interesting if there was a case where something happened and, like, a tribe of dwarves from the fantasy universe, something happened to them and they got transported to a new world in the 40k universe and they just evolved. I honestly think that would be something that would be kind of fascinating. And so, like, it's been, you know, however many, again, millennia, and so their histories become somewhat obscured, but they still have some legends and tales of the old world, and that's where their origins are from, which is why they don't, you know, have anything to do with the emperor and yada yada. I think that would be fascinating, honestly. And it would also kind of, I guess, almost be a little bit of an Easter egg in some, you know, sense that, you know, there is some kind of multiversal tie-in between the fantasy and 40k universes, even though they are separate. There's kind of, like, you know, I guess this thin, you know, line between them that is separated by, you know, the Imperium, I guess, maybe something like that, you know.
Some of the kin will tell variations of this tale, where Votann is a lone individual who arose from the ancestors as the wisest and eldest of them all. Others, however, maintain the stance that Votann refers to the entire group of their gilded ancients. But alas, we will likely never know the truth behind this schism. Further mythos will read that it was the Votann who produced the first crucibles, allowing their species to endlessly clone themselves before releasing them out into the void, where they were eventually swallowed up and ensnared by the roiling tempest of the cosmos. Interestingly, the first ancestors are sometimes described by the kin as being somewhat alien, and at times they will be depicted as but a dark shadow lurking behind their burgeoning society.
Well, and again, like, I mean, was gonna bring it back to the Interrex, right, from the first book in the Horus Heresy. Like the alien species that the Interrex kind of end up having a symbiotic relationship with. From what I remember, they sounded almost kind of dwarfish in certain ways. They were like a shorter, kind of squatter alien species that was humanoid, if I remember correctly. So I wonder if maybe there would be some kind of offshoot relationship to what they're talking about here. You know, it could be an old one's reference too. It could be that, yeah, that like they're saying that they were created by the old ones in some way, or they were an offshoot of one of the old ones, or an experiment from one of the old ones. That could be it as well too.
Now, as I mentioned before, the kin do not cling to these tales, and most would scoff at the notion of truly considering their ancestors as being half humanoid, half alien entities. But it is still an interesting thought to consider. We should understand, however, that there are many points within their history which the kin have settled upon as being utterly irrefutable, and these would be known as the first truths. But it would be from these that we have now learned of their authentic tale. The ancient ancestors of the kin ventured out into the void aboard generational ships, seemingly in the hopes of finding wealth and riches beyond compare.
So would that mean, right, like if they did come from humanity back in the day, they would have had to have been before humanity had reached that dark age technology, right? Because they're talking about generational ships, which is essentially before they had warp travel or any kind of light speed travel. So at least I would assume, right? Like, why would you make generational ships if you can like go through the warp and travel from one planet to another in a few hours versus several hundred or maybe even 1,000 years kind of a situation, right? So interesting.
From what we understand, their original home world was none other than Holy Terra, meaning that they are but a distant relative to all mankind. Based on the fact that the modern-day Leagues possess many ancient and forbidden technologies, we can safely say that they would have left on their fated expedition at some point during the first half of the Dark Age of technology, perhaps to found new colonies for the young human race.
Which I'm
Since
sure
humanity
the Mechanicus would love to get hold of that technology.
Their abominable intelligences in the wake of the AI revolts, and that the League still possess their own, we could also speculate that the Votann fell into their state of isolation not long after departing from Terra.
Which would also mean, right, like, is it a situation where somehow their culture, race, species, whatever you want to call them, like, their AIs didn't get corrupted, like they were spared any kind of corruption, and so they didn't have to deal with the AI rebellion, and so they never kind of had that like regression of technology, and so their technology just essentially kind of kept advancing to a certain degree with the STCs, or did after they dealt with the AI rebellion, they were somehow able to purge them in certain ways and find ways to keep them from getting corrupted again, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that would be an interesting story to kind of hear about, is like how they dealt with the AI uprising issue, if they even had to at all.
As an interesting point, whilst most conventional generational ships would rely on their crews producing offspring in the natural way, the kin did not seem to follow this plan. Instead, they cloned one another, using artifacts known as crucibles whenever they required more workers.
Interesting.
Even at this early stage, League historians will claim that the Ironkin already walked amongst them. These are robotic constructs which have been fitted with an advanced cerebral unit, providing them with the ability to imitate the emotions and lives of the kin. At times, They can be quite convincing, but do not let their crude mimicry fool you, for they are not sentient life forms and instead are simple machines who only display their emotional facade as a means to better blend in with kin society. In any case, once out into the void, the entirety of the ancestral Votann seemed to be inexplicably drawn towards the beating heart of the galaxy itself, and as they drifted into this treacherous zone, they made the decision to never again return to Holy Terror. The fact that the vast majority of the Votann moved in unison to their perilous destination perhaps suggests that their eventual split from humanity had been planned long ago, and that they never intended to live out their lives as a simple colonial force.
That would be an interesting tale to learn about, I guess. You know, I mean, it seems like in the 40k universe, they are never going to explore, you know, what happened during that dark age of technology era, right? Like that was the ancient historical past to the Imperium, and we might get like certain glimpses every now and then of the technology that was there, and maybe some historical references to Earth and what humanity was like during that time period, but that's probably it. They're never going to like in-depth explore it, but it would be interesting if they did, to kind of explore what would have maybe caused that kind of rift or split between, you know, different factions in humanity that would make the Votann want to kind of leave and form their own world, essentially, and how they also relied more on cloning, and seemingly they created, you know, AI constructs earlier on than I guess, you know, what the remnants of the Imperium did, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, it would be pretty fascinating to get into that kind of lore and what happened with that, honestly. Sounds like Imperium propaganda to me, if I remember correctly. They aren't kind of straight up AI, but the Imperium, but if the Imperium shows up, they're like, look at these dumb robots. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, you would also think, right, that if the Votann are cool with AI, like, they wouldn't try to hide it, right? Although, maybe they understand that the Imperium, I don't know. It might just be a situation where they're trying to, like, not provoke anything with the Imperium, I guess.
But once the worlds of the galactic core were scanned and surveyed, it quickly became clear that their kind were ill-prepared to dwell upon those hazardous grounds. The oppressive gravity upon most planets would snap the bones of a feeble human as though they were toothpicks, whilst the brutal rains and harsh winds would flense the skin from their bones.
Yeah, there would have to be some genetic engineering and tampering.
The kin turned towards the colossal ancestor cores found within their ships for aid.
Yeah, exactly.
These were, and
for sure they would. For sure they would. Because, I mean, first of all, just the Mechanicus alone, like, they would see it as just a front to everything that they stand for. And they would want to, you know, destroy any kind of technology or remnant of them anyway. So, like, just from the Mechanicus standpoint alone, you know, they would invade.
Still are, free-thinking artificial intelligences which are to be considered as truly sentient and almost omniscient in their knowledge. Some have speculated that, given their vast data repositories and logic banks, that perhaps they are a modified or more advanced version of an STC, but I believe that instead they are simply another similar relic from our species-old Dark Age. Interestingly,
and I mean, again, right, like, it sounds like technology may have diverged in certain ways with Votann if it's true that they created AI constructs earlier, and maybe they found a way to keep the AI from being corrupted, that maybe this is just their version of an STC, and then over time they have lost the ability to maintain them properly, or I don't know. Who knows?
At this point, the
Right,
mythic stories of the kin seem to cease.
The Mechanicus would, I'm sure, love to get their hands on the ancestor cores and learn whatever they can about them. The thing is, though, I mean, I've talked about this before. It's just funny, like, you know, they already have STCs, you know, in the forms of some of their ships and whatnot, but they just refuse to open their eyes to what they really are, you know.
And from here on out, they will refer to their ancestor cores as the Votann, leaving the tales of their biological ancestors in the distant past. Thus, we should consider our story as having entirely moved away from the realm of myth, and the following shall account for the parts of their tale, which the kin know to be truly authentic. The Votann, calculating a solution to their conundrum on habitability, produced a vast array of stable mutations known as clone skeins, to be imbued within the colonists as a means of protecting them from the inhospitable conditions of the galactic core. Physically, the changes were truly remarkable. The musculoskeletal systems of the kin, once equivalent to a modern human, were now shockingly dense, providing them with the means to endure the trials of nature which would soon befall their kind. We are not entirely sure if the clone skeins can...
You know, they almost kind of seem like, I mean, a space dwarf version of like a mixture between Space Marines and the Mechanicus, from like how their suits of armor and the various limbs and their technology. It's almost like they took Space Marines and the Mechanicus, smashed them together and said, here are space dwarves, which I'm okay with. Honestly, I think, like, just from their look, if they get some cool stuff on the tabletop version, that this would be a faction that I could probably get into.
Can be named as the causative reason behind their kind shrinking in height, or if it was simply from their choice to live upon high-gravity worlds for thousands of years. But whatever the reason, the kin care not, and they stand proud, even if a little squat. But on this point, some of the physical mutations of the clone skeins were to manifest within the populace at random, meaning that each kin will appear completely unique from one another. Perhaps this was intentionally planned by the Votann, which sought to provide a degree of personality to a population which was entirely derived from aggressive cloning regimes.
I mean, that makes sense.
But physical alterations aside, the clone skeins provided a far more interesting change to the kin, and it would relate to the connection of their souls, to the warp. The mutation would cause the souls of each and every kin to slowly dim, making them to be nigh imperceivable to demonic entities, unless, of course, they are encountered upon the field.
That's kind of fascinating. So, millennia of cloning has made their souls indistinguishable from demonic essences. Is that right? Let me rewind that and listen to that again.
The mutation would cause the souls of each and every kin to slowly dim, making them to be nigh imperceivable to demonic entities, unless, of course, they are encountered upon the field.
That's pretty fascinating. So the mutations that they went through to allow them to live in these high gravity worlds, and from the cloning that they were doing, has made their soul essence, energy, whatever you want to call it, imperceivable from that of chaos demons. Interesting. I wonder what kind of lore implications that's going to have moving forward. If Games Workshop, you know, has any kind of plans for them and that. But that's pretty interesting.
Naturally, this makes it almost impossible for a kin to wield the powers of the Imperium. But there are some rather rare clone skeins, which will provide a semblance of psychic power to a few chosen individuals, who within League society will be known as the Grimnir. In any case, with...
I guess that's what that means, right? So it's like, and like he's just said right there, that it's extremely rare for them to have any kind of psychers. So that might be the plus and minus of that situation, right? Like Chaos doesn't see them as anything different from other demons, so they don't mess with the Votann. They don't try to, you know, possess them and inhabit them or whatever. But at the same time, they also don't have any kind of psychers or any kind of abilities, I guess, to protect themselves from anyone that is able to use the warp. So I would assume they would have to, kind of like the Necrons have with certain technologies, they would have to develop certain technologies that would allow them to nullify or absorb or deal with any kind of, you know, warp related attacks or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that would, and maybe that would explain why their AI never got corrupted. I mean, I don't know if it's ever been confirmed one way or the other, but from everything that I've seen about the Dark Age of technology and the AI uprising, it seems that Chaos got into the AI and corrupted them, and that led to the uprising. So it could very well be that these mutations and whatnot kept them cloaked from Chaos, so that's how they were able to avoid having to deal with any kind of AI uprising. You know what I mean? That would be interesting. I think it means less that they have similar essence to Chaos, but their souls are dimmed. Chaos can't. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense.
The kin, now perfectly adapted to the galactic core, they settled upon the world's most rich in resources and established the first colonies of their new empire. Within their settlements, all would belong to a social group known as a kindred. This terminology can refer to anything from a small family unit, all the way up to the populace of an entire world. But, regardless of their size, every kin will forever belong to their own kindred, with its members each tracing their birth to the same cloning crucible. But as they founded new and ever greater colonies, the kin were able to blossom forth and spread across the core like a wildfire. Asteroid belts, which had drifted aimlessly since the days of the war in heaven, were captured by fleets of mining vessels, only to be blasted apart and harvested for every last valuable mineral to be found within.
Yeah, I was going to say that would probably be the only danger towards the core that the Votann would have to deal with, would maybe be the Necron, right? Because like the Eldar are in the webway, they don't care. I would assume, from what I understand of the craft worlds are actually towards the outer rims of the galaxy, kind of away from everything. So they wouldn't be involved in anything. I doubt the orcs would have any kind of care to go towards the core. So like, other than the Necrons, I don't know whatever other kind of alien race would be out there that the Votann would get involved in. And so with them having their mutations and whatnot to deal with the gravity changes, they would have probably free reign of a lot of territory in the core. So makes sense that they would spread like wildfire, right? I wonder if these were deliberate mutations encouraged by the ancestor cores, or if it was evolution, same as their height. Yeah, I don't know. Probably a mixture of both, right?
Entire planets were tethered to a stable location, only to be sliced in half, exposing their blazing hearts, which would be used to power the sprawling networks of refineries and autonomous mining drones, reducing the once desolate world down into dust. Some legends even say that the kin possessed tools known as particle excavators, which could be used to drain the energies of a newly formed star, providing them with the means to produce exotic elements, which were too unstable to ever be found in nature.
They were all eaten by the Tyranids.
As their kind expanded...
Yeah, I was going to say, like, the Tyranids would be the only thing I could think of, but the Tyranids, according to what we know, weren't around until relatively recent in the 40k lore. So they would have had time to, you know, expand and do their own thing and set up their vast empire towards the core, unless the Tyranids had already had a presence there. You know, because I mean, there's some stories and things in the lore that, you know, kind of state that the Tyranids may have been here and dormant all along. And once they were awakened, it might have, you know, brought the hive back to this galaxy.
Further, some of the kindreds began to specialize in certain industries, which naturally led to the formation of trade deals between their worlds. Their ties became so close, in fact, that the worlds came together to form the first of the trade leagues, which in part is why we call this faction as the Leagues of Votann. In time, dozens of leagues would be founded within the core, each of which would boast its own unique cultural or industrial practices, ever to be clad in their chosen colors and defended by their shared military might. The Leagues of Votann, however, were at this point rather focused on growing their young empire, but it did not mean that their kind were entirely insular. In order to honor the ancestors, it is said that a kin must live a full life and discover all that they can, which prompted many to become prospectors who would leave the core to explore the wider galaxy. Some went on to form trade routes with alien empires, whilst others, who were more violent in their tendencies, offered themselves up as mercenaries to many a warlord. Whatever their reasoning, however, once they felt as though they had learned their valuable lessons, then they would retreat back into the harshness of the core to share their tales with their fellow kin. But throughout their ventures, they are never too keen to share in the secrets of their empire, which is the primary reason as to why their kind is seen as being so mysterious.
So I wonder, like, strategically speaking, if anyone were to invade the Votann territory, right? Like let's say the Imperium decided to invade. Would like the Space Marines, genetic alterations, and the power armor and everything, I would assume it would allow them to survive in these heavy gravity environments, right? But like, it would take them time to get used to, I would assume. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, strategically, it would also just give the Votann probably a fairly big advantage from anyone invading their territory, because other species have evolved and are not used to such gravity dense environments. You know what I'm saying? So it would almost be like, you know, fighting an uphill battle kind of a situation. Just in case someone's about to get mad. Yeah, it happens.
Most alien species only have rather short tales to tell of their experiences with the Leagues, but this works out perfectly fine for the kin, who feel no need to reveal any unnecessary information to a random outsider. Over the long years, however, their stance of secrecy and generally quite stubborn attitudes towards diplomacy led to an overall degradation in their once amicable relations with the factions of the galaxy. They cared not for the tales of the Imperial missionaries, and so outright rejected the deific authority of the Emperor, which naturally led to the Inquisition to label the kin as foul Xenos, who should be exterminated wherever found. The oafishness of the Orcs and perverted violence of the Drukhari similarly made it impossible for them to produce reliable trade deals.
Of course.
Even the young Tau, who once maintained fairly cordial relations, have clashed with the Leagues, forcing the kin into a position where they must be almost entirely self-reliant, alone in a galaxy filled with barbarous fools. As the 41st millennium came to its close, and as Cadia itself finally broke, the galaxy was split in twain by the cicatrix maledictum. this warp storm cascaded through the void, plunging many a world into chaos, and rather unfortunately, it had carved a rift directly through the galactic core, decimating the hardy worlds of the Leagues of Votann. Their millennia-old trade routes were shattered, entire kindreds were swallowed up in the roiling storm, and worse still, this region of space had seemingly turned against them. The stars mutated into colossal stellar beasts, charging out on trails of cosmic fire, only to explode in a supernova most violent. Then, out of the dark, came the aliens. Dozens of species who held their own minor empires had since been driven from their homes from the storm, and they now sought to invade the territories of the Votann in the hopes of seeking salvation from this time of ending. Naturally, some of the kin have chosen to remain within the galactic core, standing stalwart against the raging storm in the hopes of one day rebuilding their old territories and purging their realm of chaos. But from the resulting pandemonium, many were forced to flee from their decimated homes, and upon this fateful voyage, they spied the worlds of the wider galaxy as being more than suitable enough to harbor a new kindred or even of a brand new league. This has obviously put them at odds with the various factions of the cosmos, as from their...
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't really have much of a choice, right? Because all of their worlds and their trade routes got messed up. They would have to migrate and move to other areas not so active by chaos and other alien factions. So, yeah, it does make sense. And of course, they would have to try to form alliances and all that kind of stuff to, you know, survive.
Perspectives, the kin have launched a mass invasion, striking in this age of death. Thus, as it so stands today, the Leagues of Votann still hold on to their decimated realm, and yet have finally ventured out from the galactic core to stand tall against those who would otherwise label them as stubborn old squats. Now that we understand how their empire was formed, and of why they have set out into the cosmos, let us hone into their kindreds.
Let us.
To learn of their curious society, forged in the galactic core. The first point to mention is that the kin are fiercely loyal to their old traditions, and so much of their culture is based around protecting their families, their leagues, and perhaps most
That's pretty much how like dwarves work in any kind of
core.
fantasy setting.
As I mentioned before, the Leagues exist as the largest of organizations within their empire, with some containing several dozen worlds, each of which will support one another through sharing their military might and by opening up their trade routes. But what we must understand is that at the heart of each and every league, we will find at least one of the ancestor cores, or Votann, as they are often called. We will soon cover them in more detail when we go over the technology of the kin. But for now, just know that these are ancient, free-thinking artificial intelligences, which have come to play an incredibly significant role in the League's society.
Now, I wonder what would happen if one of the Mechanicus STC ships were to get close enough to communicate with one of these ancestor cores, right? Like, would they recognize each other? Would they be like, hey, bro, what's up? I haven't seen you in 30,000 years, man. How you doing? And, you know, start communicating with each other. And would the STC from Mechanicus, like, start working to maybe repair these things? You know, I don't know. It would be interesting. It would be interesting to see what kind of interaction would take place were that to happen.
But we will get to those in due time. And for now, let us look into their familial structure. As I previously mentioned, the kin are a cloned species, with every single individual having been born from the great artificial wombs.
And that also brings up something, right? Because, like, obviously their technology is, you know, way ahead of ours. But, you know, the thing with cloning is that you start to get genetic degradation. You know, you make a clone of a clone of a clone of a clone, you get degradation. So they must have some kind of ways of either fixing those genetic issues, or they have some kind of way of like very well preserving the original like DNA that these clones were made from. And then I would assume also they have um technology that allows them to genetically manipulate DNA in certain ways so that clones aren't necessarily exact copies of them, you know, themselves, like they'd said, so that they can have different kind of traits and some kind of genetic diversity among their species, kind of a situation. So that'd be interesting to learn more about too.
Known as crucibles. The creation process of new kin is entirely controlled by the ancestor cores of their league, which will produce as many kin as it believes is necessary for the continuation of their empire. Interestingly, the Votann will also assign the newborn kin with a given name, which will remain with them for their entire life, as the kin believe that it is deeply disrespectful to their ancestors to cast aside a title granted by their guiding machines. But later in life, as the kin forge their own identity, they will often pick out a chosen name for themselves, which is typically selected as a means to express their pride or passion in a certain aspect of League society.
So they'll have like their given name from the Votann, and then like a surname will be the name that they chose themselves. Kind of a situation, I bet, is how it works.
It is important to mention that the kin see their own individuality as being vitally important, and so they will often display intricate tattoos or bear exotic piercings for all to see. Similarly, they will proudly display any unique physical quirks brought about by the clone skeins, which may produce vibrant hair colors or even cause one's skin to display interesting patterns and marks. The only members who are not provided with a given name would be of the mechanical iron kin, who are free to choose any name which they feel most connected to. From the moment of their birth, the kin will belong to their kindred, and those within this grouping will always be considered as their direct family. This bond runs incredibly deep, as most familial kin will find that their own thoughts and actions are surprisingly coordinated, making their society incredibly efficient and tight-knit. Some have claimed that this synchronicity could have been caused by the clone skeins, providing the kin with an imperceivable sense of telepathy, but we will likely never know if this is true.
Interesting.
In any case, each kindred will have been named by the ancestral group who first established a colony upon that world. Sometimes they will have chosen to use the name of a specific ancestor as a means to eternally venerate their memory, whereas other times the name may come from the curious landmarks which either define the world or the local region of space. The actual size of a kindred can vary quite wildly, ranging from only a few dozen individuals within a single family, all the way up to an entire nation inhabited by millions. We are not entirely sure as to the total populace of the combined leagues, but it has been estimated that there are more kin alive today than there are Tau or even Eldar.
Yeah, I would agree. The Votann have a cool aesthetic and interesting lore. Definitely a good addition to 40k. I agree. I mean, I'm already interested to learn more about them and to see kind of what their models would look like on the tabletop and whatnot, because I could see myself getting into this faction. You know, the dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy were one of my favorite factions in the, you know, Total War Warhammer games. So I could see myself getting into space dwarves in 40k. You know what I mean? But yeah, they seem to have some pretty interesting lore. You know, essentially splitting off from humanity, and through technological means, cloning, mutations, etc., they established themselves in the core of the galaxy where they pretty much thrived until the cicatrix malediction, whatever, happened after Cadria blew up. And somehow, I'm sure somehow, that can be traced back to Erebus. I'm just saying. But then they've had to expand out from there. So, but yeah, they definitely are an interesting faction.
The kindreds, though most often sworn to a league, will still bear the responsibility of self-governance, and this will be carried out by a group known as the Hearthspake. This is a council made up of the most influential or powerful of kin, including the senior military officers, the ruling guild masters, and of the enigmatic individuals known as the Grimnir. They will convene within a great chamber, named as the Spakarunde, only to stubbornly debate one another over vitally important directives, oftentimes leading to a stalemate, as the kin will rarely relent in their deeply entrenched beliefs over what is best for the kindred.
Well, and I mean, that's what I was like talking about in one of the past videos. I don't remember which video it was, but it seems like now they're starting to like actually progress present timeline forward. They seem to be pretty what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It's interesting how, like, when you look at the 40k universe, right? Like, most of what's happened in the 40k universe has been fleshing out the history of the universe up until now, and now they're finally looking like they're focusing on pushing what's happening in the present forward and moving the present timeline forward, bringing some of the Primarchs back. We've got Gilliman back, we've got Lion back. It looks like there's rumors that Fulgrim's going to be the next Primarch to come back. They're going to bring a Demon Primarch back. The Emperor stirring, and more people are getting more visions from him, etc., etc. And they're starting to flesh out more things with other races. The Tyranid, the Phoenix Lords and the Eldari are getting some updates. Necrons, I think, just got some recent stuff, and there's more books of that coming out. They're bringing back the Votann. So, like, I'm wondering, like, if they're going to start bringing some other races from the Warhammer fantasy into the 40k universe and setting in certain ways, like the Skaven. Could they bring the Skaven in some kind of way, call them something different? And, where would they come from? Where would their lore, fit into this? The Beastmen, I think the Beastmen are already like some kind of a part of another race or something, but they could bring them up a little bit more. Stuff like that. So it makes me wonder, like, if they have those kind of plans, right? Like, if they're going to start not only pushing things forward and expanding on lore and things from current factions, but expanding and adding other factions, potentially some from the fantasy universe, and bringing them into the 40k in their own unique ways, kind of a situation. Votann actually seemed distinct than 40k specific, though. They were going to, if like they would do the Lizardmen. Yeah, like the Lizardmen. Do they want to flesh out the old ones? Do they want to actually confirm that they were the Slann and flesh them out more and maybe bring them back in some way? As being that the Necrons are coming back and are going to be more of a major thing as well. Do they want to bring them back into the mix as part of the Lizardmen potentially? That would be interesting. I mean, the Tomb Kings are essentially the Necrons of the fantasy universe, so that's already there. I'm just trying to think of what other races there are. It's like they got the Skaven, there's the Lizardmen. I mean, there's vampires, but I mean, there's already kind of like the Night Lords, and the Blood Angels are kind of like, that that in the 40k universe already. But I guess they could create some other kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't know how an undead faction would really work, because that's, again, has already been encompassed by some of the other factions, Night Lords, Blood Angels, and the Necrons. You know, they already kind of have those aspects of undead slash vampires, so that wouldn't really work to bring them back. You know, I would assume, you know, there's dwarves and chaos dwarves. Maybe they could have chaos Votann, you know, in those kind of ways. But I would, the only other like major factions that I could really think of in the fantasy universe that they could bring in some kind of way would be the Beastmen, the Lizardmen, and the Skaven. If they wanted to do so. They already have a few Horde factions, so Skaven wouldn't feel as unique. I mean, they could change them in certain ways so that maybe they aren't as much of a Horde faction, you know? They could change a Skaven so that in the 40k universe, they, maybe they're more technologically advanced, because like that was kind of one of the things that the Skaven had, depending on the faction, was, you know, they have the rattling gunners and the warp flamers and things like that. They kind of were a little more technologically sound, so maybe they would be a more like technologically sound rat race of some sort. You know, I don't know. Who knows? I'm sure they could figure out some kind of way of doing it, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they're going to bring more factions in and what that would look like.
With that being said, it is incredibly rare for us to find a member of the Hearthspake who wishes to further their own political career at the cost of supporting their kindred, so they will always seek to find the most practical and agreeable solutions. Also, we must remember that since the minds of the familial kin are somewhat synchronized, that they will often develop the same ideas as one another, but this still doesn't prevent the occasional debate from sparking to life. The Grimnir, who I previously mentioned, are the only members of their kind who are permitted to commune with the ancestor cause, and if a decision cannot be made within their councils, then this figure may beseech the Votann for a possible solution. Unfortunately, the machines have long since degraded from their once pristine condition, and so the Grimnir must be incredibly careful with their questioning, as it could cause the Votann to be caught in a logic loop, from where it will remain stuck for potentially years at a time. Within the Society of the...
So, they could ask the wrong question of the Votann that could, like, blue screen it for a while until it fixes itself. That would suck.
Kin. We will also find...
I guess they don't know how to, like, turn it off and turn it on again, huh?
A series of large-scale organizations known as the Guilds, which are each responsible for overseeing a specific aspect of trade or industry across the leagues. They were originally formed as a means to make commercial trade within the leagues to be more fair and equitable, since at times it was noted that most kin would provide a hefty discount to those within their kindred, which inevitably led to a degree of friction between rival families, who would always demand for the same concessions. For any job to be taken within the leagues, we will almost certainly find an associated guild. For example, if you were particularly interested in capturing and siphoning off the atmosphere of a gargantuan gas giant, then you could seek out a local harvester guild and apply for work. Likewise, if you harbored a true passion towards the maintenance of interstellar trade routes, then you could turn to the sprawling Ingvari Combined Logistics Guild, which has become quite influential within the Greater Thurian League. The ruling guild master and their fellows will be ultimately responsible for setting out the standards of labor for these jobs, partly to ensure that the actual output is of a sufficient quality, but also to provide the working kin with a relatively safe environment to ply their trade. Their policies will vary wildly between the guilds, and for a rather unique example, let us look at the collective known as the Chthonian mining guilds. They will overwhelmingly favor mining and scrapping jobs when they are found in the most treacherous or hostile of environments. For instance, they will jump at the opportunity to delve into the bowels of a derelict space hulk, or to set up a new strip mine upon the surface of a stray asteroid dangerously careening towards the event horizon of a black hole. Similarly, these dastardly squats have become rather infamous for raiding the stockpiles
Dastardly
or
squats.
resource troves of other alien species, since, in their mind, any material asset is ripe for the taking, whether it is to be found in nature or within a fortified vault. Any kin, should they have the stones for it, may choose to form their own guild, and so we will find a great deal of competition between rival organizations, especially if they have laid claim to the same valuable regions. We have heard limited reports of standoffs erupting into open conflict if the guilds cannot amicably resolve their rivalry, but thankfully this is rare indeed. Most of the time, the guilds will strive to best their rivals by outperforming them in a commercial sense, perhaps by becoming more efficient in their trade or by simply producing a higher quality product for the galactic markets. As I previously mentioned, the ancient trade routes of the kin grew tremendously.
I saw that word and I was like, Goa old? They got Goa old industrial complex? What? I love Stargate. I'm just saying. But like, yeah, I look at that. That's where my brain goes, all right? That's where my brain goes. See stuff like that, my brain just makes the association.
Over the long millennia to include defensive pacts and economic ties,
Exactly. Yeah.
which have since allowed many of the kindreds to come together to form a league.
Well, it also makes me wonder, like, again, because it sounds like other species have kind of left the galactic core alone, other than maybe the Necrons, but maybe not even. You know, I wonder, like, if they found any remnants of the old ones, any kind of ancient ruins that were left over from the old ones, etc., etc. I mean, that could be a way of bringing the lizardmen in to the 40k universe, right? Like the Votann find some kind of ancient ruin of the lizardmen / old ones, and they actually have, you know, an old one or some lizardmen in some kind of stasis, and you know they're going there to loot it and they accidentally activate it, and you know then they start, you know, coming back in the setting, kind of a situation. You know, that would be interesting. That could be an interesting way of bringing them, you know, back into stuff. So I don't know, but that's something that I've often thought about through like all this with the various factions and exploration. And I mean, there's all kinds of alien races, and it's been, you know, however many millions of years, etc., since the War in Heaven happened. So, you know, any remnant of the old ones could have been just straight wiped out. But with, you would think with the galaxy as vast as it is, and with how technologically advanced they were, that there would be some kind of relics, traces of the old ones left that would be found, you know, out there in the galaxy still, that at least some of the races would have stumbled upon. So Puff's actually survived and joined the Votann. Yeah, right. Yeah. He's led the Votann industrial complex as Apophis. And yeah, he's changed his ways. He's no longer about domination. He's just about going out there and making money. You know, he's about bringing in the planets, sucking up the gas, and turning a profit. That's all Apophis is here for nowadays.
Those who have pledged themselves to a chosen league will don the colors and symbols of one of the fabled generational ships which first brought their kind into the galactic core. But beyond simple colors, the actual cultures and societal goals of the kin within each league have slowly diverged over time. For example, the Trans-Hyperion Alliance have devoted near every aspect of their society towards the maintenance and enrichment of their Votann core. For thousands of years, they have sent out exploratory vessels into the cosmos in the belief that their discoveries may prolong the lifespan of their fading Votann. Similarly, they will readily wage war with other alien species, as there is much to learn about the state of reality when engaged within a bloody battle. The Greater Thurian League, however, is generally more interested in avoiding war, since it is during a time of peace where new trade routes can blossom. Since this group is made up of over 200 distinct kindreds, it has become one of the largest and wealthiest of leagues, which has since provided them with the resources needed to settle 2 nearby sectors, found outside of the galactic core. Though the past 2 leagues have existed for thousands of years, the following group, known as the Cronus Hegemony, was only founded fairly recently, when one of their artifacts, known as a Fane, became self-aware, leading to the kin to treat it as a newly formed Votann. Unfortunately, this core has been so ravenous for knowledge and resources that the hegemony has since set out on an aggressive warpath, sometimes putting them at odds with the fellow leagues of the core. At this point, the mythics...
Whoops. Where was I? I did not mean to do that. There we go. That's where we were. My bad. I meant to actually click in here and pause it and not click on the timeline. What I was going to say is, like, that looks like a beastman right there. You know what I'm saying? So, like, it seems like they're already in 40k on some kind of state, fashion, whatever. So, I mean, maybe they could just expand on them. But anyway.
That the hegemony has since set out on an aggressive warpath, sometimes putting them at odds with the fellow leagues of the core. But the kindreds of the Cronus hegemony care not, and they have established quotas of conquest which can only be paid by the kin from engaging in a brutal war with whoever they can possibly find. Just as their ancestors set out into the void all those years ago, in the hopes of uncovering a trove of riches from the unmapped regions of the galaxy, so too will many of the kin have a fondness for exploration. It could be argued that all within their species hold a deep desire towards discovering the various mysteries of the cosmos, and yet those within the core are often slightly too preoccupied with their own duties, and so this exploratory task will fall to the group, known as the Hernkin. They are pioneers whose travels will take them far from the safety of the leagues, out into the unexplored wilderness of the galaxy, to worlds where no kin has ever walked, nor even seen through their own eyes. It is not inconceivable to imagine that, during their journey, a band of the Hernkin may have explored hundreds of unique worlds, mapped out the surfaces of curious moons, and during this time, very likely witnessed some truly awe-inspiring celestial events. Similarly, it would be inevitable for them to make contact with potentially dozens of alien species, some friendly,
I would assume not
so friendly. But if they do indeed detect that
But I mean, they could do a situation where, again, because of the Cicatrix Maledictum now, like, maybe it's caused more mutations in certain subhumans, and, you know, so that could expand the Beastmen into, like, instead of just being a subhuman species, they could be, like, their own faction, etc., etc. You know, there's a lot of ways that they could bring, you know, factions into the 40k universe if they really wanted to. They could find ways to do it.
Hostile fleet has set its course towards the galactic core, then they may send a message of warning back to the leagues, prompting the kin to mobilize their defensive forces. As we briefly mentioned before, to the kin, family is everything, and it will always be quite painful for them to say their farewells to a group from their kindred, who have chosen to become Hernkin, but they know that this is a necessary role to play. And so, as a final gift, the Kindreds will equip the explorers with a robust inventory of survivalist equipment. Aside from being gifted with the most advanced of scouting ships found within the League fleets, they will possess small gunships, armored vehicles, and nimble magma coil bikes, allowing them to easily traverse any realm in whatever manner they please. Though the Hernkin will be away on their journey for potentially decades at a time.
This looks like a dreadnought. He's used this picture a few times. This back here looks like a Votann dreadnought or something, man. I don't know. I don't know if that's just like a dude in a heavy suit or if it is some kind of like offshoot of like a dreadnought, but it looks pretty dope back there.
The purpose of their voyage is to eventually return to the Leagues and to share in their wondrous discoveries with the fellow kin. Not only will they reveal potentially resource-rich areas of the void for the guilds to claim and exploit, but in time their experiences will also come to enrich the Votann ancestor cores, helping to keep them functional, even as they drift into senescence. It is impossible to speak of the Leagues of Votann without mentioning their impressive array of technologies. As we previously mentioned,
sound like a pretty technologically advanced race.
First constructed during the Dark Age of technology, which the kin have preserved and treasured within the galactic core.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, I mean, there's a lot of technology that humans had that rivaled, if not even surpassed, like the Eldar in certain aspects, you know, from my understanding. So if they still had access to that kind of technology this whole time, they would be quite the advanced and potentially formidable, you know, faction to deal with.
But the artifacts, which we are to speak of now, were utterly instrumental in allowing the kin to survive and thrive out in the cosmos, and they would be known as the Votann. As we previously discussed, the Votann, also named as the Ancestor Cores, are ancient machine intelligences, first carried within the generational...
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is a situation where, like, most of the other factions might outnumber the Votann, especially after them having to migrate from the Cicatrix Maledictum, you know, being formed. But their technological advancement would still probably give them the edge, you know, in a lot of scenarios.
Ships of the kin all those years ago. None within the Leagues would consider themselves as the owners or masters of the Votann, as the two have grown and evolved together over the years, each contributing their complete effort towards the furtherment of the other. Truly, we could never consider a scenario where the Leagues would exist without the ever-present guidance of the Votann, nor of a time where the Votann would seek to be independent from the loyal guardians of the Leagues. But when it comes to the Votann, the databanks and repositories stored within their cores...
I mean, yeah, like the Necrons are pretty much the oldest race now in the galaxy. So, you know, I mean, and they're immortal. They literally have, like, councils that take thousands of years to form any kind of decision because they just have that kind of time to weigh in all the various factors and variabilities and yada yada to make a decision about something that could be potentially, you know, minor or great.
Are so vast and all-encompassing that it can truly feel as though they are omniscient. From what we understand, they were first created as a means to aid humanity during its early efforts to colonize the stars, as the stellar pioneers would inevitably run up against a treacherous realm which they themselves would not be able to conquer. In many ways, they can be seen as an improvement to the standard template constructs, which were known to play a similar role during this period. Both would provide the instructions and methods needed to produce weapons, tanks, fortifications, or entire settlements from scratch. But unlike the STCs, the Votann were to contain a truly free and unrestricted form of an artificial intelligence. They could ponder and reason as to the nature of reality, aiding the early kin with questions of philosophy or scientific theory. And from their guidance, the first kindreds and leagues were able to develop with an astonishing sense of stability. As I mentioned in our last chapter, each league is in the possession of at least one Votann, which will be protected at all times by a host of Hearthguard warriors, each of whom will be more than prepared to lay down their lives in the defense of this sacred core. It has been noted that some leagues will hold their Votann at the very heart of a great fortress, locked behind impregnable layers of shimmering power fields.
I bet.
Others, however, will be mounted within the greatest flagship of a league fleet. And so, if any dangers do rear their ugly heads, then the core may be quickly shuttled away to safety. With that being said,
it would be interesting if one of the Votann, cores decided it didn't want to be there anymore, right? And set up a situation where another faction, the Imperium, maybe, could abduct it and take it away, Maybe it wants to go out and explore the galaxy and not be where it is anymore. Maybe it wants to, rekindle a connection with the roots of humanity and try to bring humanity back to an enlightened state like they were in, before the dark age of technology happened, and the AI uprising happened, etc., etc. So I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things that they could do with the Votann and these cores in the 40k universe that could twist and change a lot of things in the lore.
Not every league has been successful in defending their Votann from the flames of conflict. The League of the Grand Orion Compact lost their Votann during the 500 Years' War, when a horde of orcs finally cracked their citadel and tore the ancient core asunder. In response to this incomparable loss, the Compact swore a grudge against each and every orc of the invasive empire, and though it took them half a millennia to do so, they were ultimately victorious in slaying the final green skin.
They even have the grudges.
Their realm. Whilst every kin knows of the existence and function of the Votann, there are only a select few who will ever be graced with an opportunity to commune with the ancient intelligence, and these individuals will be known as the Grimnir. These figures possess an incredibly rare clone skein, which grants them with a limited sense of psychic power, and perhaps this is why they have been chosen to interpret the messages of the Votann. Though we all know that artificial intelligences are foul creations, bereft of life and soul, the mysterious Votann are actually known to leave a psychic imprint within the chaos of the warp itself. We are not sure as to why this occurs, but it has allowed the pilots of the kin fleets to track their immaterial locations, which, when linked to their known coordinates within reality, will produce a remarkably accurate map of the warp.
Interesting. So they have their own kind of navigators in a certain way. I want to rewind that and listen to that again.
Mysterious Votann are actually known to leave a psychic imprint within the chaos of the warp itself. Though we all know that artificial intelligences are foul creations, bereft of life and soul, the mysterious Votann are actually known to leave a psychic imprint within the chaos of the warp itself. We are not sure as to why this occurs, but it has allowed the pilots of the kin fleets to track their immaterial locations, which, when linked to their known coordinates within reality, will produce a remarkably accurate map of the warp.
Interesting. So the Votann have a psychic connection that allows, you know, them to navigate the warp essentially and map it out. That also is very interesting that none of the Votann cores have been like corrupted by chaos then, right? Like, is it a situation where he said, you know, earlier that so like there's like the actual like squats, you know, the not the Votann cores, but the actual like living people that make up the Leagues of Votann, you know, the dwarves, the squats, whatever you want to call them, you know. And so because of their mutations and their cloning, their souls have changed over time, and so like it's become indistinguishable from chaos. So like chaos doesn't necessarily see them or mess with them, but the AI cores sound different in the fact that they have some kind of psychic imprint in the Imperium, and they then are able to map out the warp and navigate through it. You would think that that would act as like a beacon for chaos to be like, hey, what is this? You know what I mean? So like, if that's the case, then how have these cores been able to keep themselves from being corrupted? Is this Votann technology, like you said again in this video earlier, that these cores are actually potentially an offshoot and in some ways an upgrade from the STCs, and that they actually have their own consciousness and intelligence, and that they are essentially unrestricted, like fully, truly unrestricted AIs. So does that give them some way of fending off chaos corruption? You know, making them not maybe immune to it or just resistant to it? You know, I don't know. That's pretty interesting, though. It's interesting that they are able to leave a psychic beacon in the warp, yet they are seemingly resistant or immune to the corruption of chaos. Because, I mean, these things have been around for millennia, and none of them I mean, maybe we'll find out in lore in the future that some of them have been corrupted, but it seems like right now, at least, that's the case, right? Ancient core show up in the warp. I wonder what's going on with that. There's so many questions. Yeah, exactly. There's so many questions that come with that. Like, what does that mean? Are these ancestor cores, do they actually have, because they have a warp presence, are they actually demonic souls that have been infused into this AI? And so they're like, that's why they're unrestricted, right? You know, like it's actually like a greater demon in the cores, and that's also why the Votann, through the genetic mutations and cloning, because their technology has had that, and their technology is kind of derived from that. That's why their souls have become indistinguishable from that of chaos. You know, you know, because that the Votann cores were infused with demon souls, and the technology has then been infused with some kind of chaos infusion, you know, whatever. I guess is that true and 40k house souls? Probably. But I mean, that would also be, if it's true that these AI cores have some kind of demonic essence or soul in them, and that has then bled down into the cloning and mutations from, you know, for the rest of the Votann, the Imperium would see them as nothing but chaos tainted and would absolutely want to wipe them out. It would be another reason, like, not just because they have AI, their entire race would to them be, you know, tainted by chaos, and they would see them as essentially just another faction of chaos and would want to wipe them out. You know what I mean? So that would be another interesting aspect of what would happen if the Imperium found that out. By the Dark Age, were able to be corrupted. Maybe the Votann are different in some way. I feel like they've been infused with, from what he's saying, it sounds like they might have been infused with like chaos or the warp in some kind of way. So who knows? I don't know.
This could potentially suggest that the ancestor cores are indeed alive, and that they harbor true emotions. But such claims are downright heretical, and we would do well to pay them no heed.
Heresy, indeed.
In any case, when ready, the Grimnir will enter into a room named as a fane, and their communion with the Votann may begin. Every single part of this chamber, from the walls themselves, through to the tangled mess of ancient artifacts found sprawled across every surface, will come together for a singular purpose, and it is to permit the chosen kin to interface directly with the mind of the machine. None are entirely sure as to how long this communion will last, nor of the mental strain placed upon the Grimnir. But once completed, they will presumably leave the fane, hopefully with fewer questions than they once had. Rather miraculously, it is not unheard of for a fane to burst into consciousness, becoming something of a Votann itself.
You know, this is just another thought, kind of going back to what we were just talking about. Like, what if these were other kinds of chaos gods that they use the cores to escape the materium or the immaterium, right? What if these were other kind of ancient chaos gods or whatever, or beings that were close to becoming a chaos god, and they used the ancestor cores as a way to infuse themselves to escape the immaterium, and so they're just happy to be alive in this state. You know, I don't know. That would be interesting. That would be an interesting twist as well. Although you would think, right, that like, were that the case, they would have some other kind of greater powers, but maybe that's just something that they had to give up in order to transfer into these artificial entities or whatever. I don't know. It's just a thought, but it would be interesting if that were to turn out to be the case, that these were some kind of other like chaos beings that were either chaos gods themselves or beings that were close to becoming chaos gods, like really powerful greater demons that wanted to just escape the materium, and they found this way to do it. I don't know. Anyway.
Conversely, a Votann, if abandoned, may degenerate from a true machine intelligence down into a crude, unconscious fane, and there is thus far no known way to reverse this forlorn loss.
Interesting. So, if a vote... Let me rewind that and listen to that again.
As to how long this communion will last, nor of the mental strain placed upon the Grimnir. But once completed, they will presumably leave the fane, hopefully with fewer questions than they once had. Rather miraculously, it is not unheard of for a fane to burst into consciousness, becoming something of a Votann itself. Conversely, a Votann, if abandoned, may degenerate from a true machine intelligence.
Hey, what?
Leave the fane, hopefully with fewer unheard of for a fane to burst into consciousness for a singular purpose, and it is to permit the chosen kin to interface directly with the mind of the machine.
Right. So, yeah, these rune guys, they're able to, like, interact with
None
AI
are
directly.
entirely sure as to how long this communion will last, nor of the mental strain placed upon the Grimnir.
Right.
But
The
once
Grimnir.
completed, they will presumably leave the fane, hopefully with fewer questions than they once had. Rather miraculously, it is not unheard of for a fane to burst into consciousness, becoming something of a Votann itself.
What? That's kind of confusing to me, right? So, like, the Grimnir have a place where they interface with the AI called a Fane. And I guess sometimes a side effect of this interface is that these Fanes can burst into life themselves and become their own Votann core. But then if left alone, they're like if they're left alone and their consciousness isn't able to interact with things and developed, they kind of go back into like this unconscious state and they're not able to recover from it. Is that what this is that what he's saying?
Conversely, a Votann, if abandoned, may degenerate from a true machine intelligence down into a crude, unconscious feign, and there is thus far no known way to reverse this forlorn loss.
So like, yeah, I don't know, it almost seems like, yeah, the interaction of them communicating and hook jacking into the matrix, I guess, for a lack of a better term, with one of the Votann cores, is that it can birth another Votann core in one of these feigns, but if unattended and left alone, its consciousness can break down and just turn into another kind of standard AI, I guess, if not given enough interaction and stimulus to evolve into a full-fledged core. I think that's what he's talking about.
On this topic of degradation, we must acknowledge that whilst the Votann were once true technological marvels, over the long millennia, many of them have
that could be the case, Cosman, yeah,
and their consciousnesses are now sadly rather muddled. What I mean by this is that their guidance is no longer completely reliable, and at times the Votann may provide some advice which is utterly inappropriate for a given situation. The best case scenario here would be that the kin are briefly delayed for faithfully adhering to the senescent words of the Votann, but at times their corrupted guidance may in fact lead to a slew of preventable deaths, or even to the downfall of an entire league.
Again, I got to figure out how to turn it off, turn it on again, man. Got to reset that RAM every now and then, you know? Got memory leaks.
No one knows the true cause to this degenerative malady. But as it so stands today, no Grimnir can be sure as to whether or not the Votann will actually answer their question, or simply respond with a cryptic stream of babble. Beseeching the core for advice on plotting a safe trade route would have once been completed nigh instantaneously. But now, questions such as these may take several hundred years to compute, leaving the kin to be stuck in a state of constant anxiety.
Legitimately, they need to be turned off and on again. Like, legit, that's what needs to happen.
As to whether or not the machine will ever respond or simply shut down once and for all. As a final point on the Votann, they are to be involved in a rather fascinating cultural practice for the kin. When an individual dies, their body will be taken to the core, and as they return to dust, the memories and experiences of their life will be absorbed into the data banks of the Votann.
Interesting.
Thus, in death, each kin...
Maybe that's why it's becoming such a problem from the compute stuff, is they've got billions, if not trillions, of other consciousnesses inside these AI that are just like taking up all this space. And so it's just having trouble like functioning because it doesn't have enough, like, it literally doesn't have enough like hard drive space or memory left over to like keep running properly, because it's got all of these consciousnesses from the Votann in there. Huh.
Will truly return to their ancestors, and from their journey will they have enriched the knowledge of their sacred core. However, if one turns against the kindreds and shames their kind, then that dastard may be forbidden from returning to the Votann upon their death. This sentence will render their lives as utterly meaningless, as they will have been cast out not only from the living, but also from the dead. Within a kindred, we will find a countless number of unique and fascinating technologies, many of which are likely to be relics from the fabled Dark Age. For instance, each hold is fueled by a hearth, which is a blazing reactor powering every technological device within reach, from simple lights all the way up to titanic energy shields. The mythos of the Leagues reads that the flames of the hearth will burn within the hearts of every kin, and so long as even a single member of a kindred remains standing, then the hearth will continue to shine. Each kindred will similarly possess their own crucible, which, as we discussed, are the great cloning chambers in which the kin are born anew. Without this technology, the kindreds would obviously die out, and so they are to be protected at all times by a warrior group known as the Embir. Interestingly, these guardians also possess the rare psychic clone skeins, which provide them with the ability to channel the powers of the warp through their arcane barrier tech weaponry.
So these are kind of like the custodians of the Votann that are there to like literally guard the Votann cores, and they've also been gifted with the ability to manipulate the warp, as like only a few of them actually can. Fascinating.
The League worlds will be dotted with immense industrial complexes, rivaling the scale of even a Mechanicus Forge world, as they will have been dug deeply into the earth, often tracing the old mining tunnels previously carved out by a harvester guild. Above, in high orbit, asteroids will be hollowed out, their resources shuttled into a nearby smelter fleet, from where the kin will produce vast batches of valuable ingots, ready to be traded away to a distant League. Entire planets will be ground down to cosmic dust, in the ravenous pursuit of rare minerals, kicking up a system-wide field of debris, destined to drift through the void, perhaps until the very end of time. I previously mentioned the sapient machines known as the Iron Kin, which are themselves rather marvelous creations. Thanks to their inbound cerebral unit, they may process a truly vast quantity of data, so much so that they have developed a limited intellect, allowing them to mimic the emotions of their fellow, yet biological, kin. They have been completely integrated into the kindred society, and though their purpose is to serve, they are not to be considered as slaves, and instead they are held to the same level of respect as of any other kin. It is important to understand, however, that the Iron Kin hold no ambitions, and they cannot develop novel thoughts nor solutions to a problem. And so, in a most pessimistic view, I believe that they should be considered as rudimentary machine intelligences, who have been granted with a glorified role within League society.
That's kind of fascinating. And like, so they're essentially like AI individuals. They have feelings and emotions, but they don't have any kind of ambitions, and they can't create their own unique solutions to problems. They can only, I guess, be programmed with predetermined solutions to certain things. So they like have a defined role in what they do. I would assume from like their creation, they're created to do specific things. But then outside of that role and task, they're able to function like a normal person would, with feelings and emotions. Huh. Interesting.
And nothing more. The kin, however, would take offense at such a notion, since to them the composition of your body matters not, and so you may stand as a kin, whether made of flesh or iron. As a dark tale, it was once recorded that the Ironkin turned against their biological compatriots upon a battlefield, where, according to our story, their own mechanical bodies were mutated, twisting them into sapient weapons, targeted only at the bewildered ranks of the kin.
So they did get corrupted.
Given that this was a mutation of the machine, we can speculate that it was none other than Vashtor the Archiphane who caused this malady. But alas, I am not sure if we will ever know the true cause.
Huh. So it might have just been a direct intervention by Vashtor, not a part of the you know, AI uprising that happened during the Dark Age of Technology thing. That's where I was going with it. That there actually was some of them that had been corrupted during that time, but it seems like this is something that might have happened more recent and because of a direct interference from a greater demon.
Though they have indeed asserted themselves as the masters of the galactic core, the region is so enormously vast that there will always be interlopers found lurking in the dark. Thus, the Leagues are constantly put at odds with renegades, pirates, and dastardly corsairs who have ventured into the perilous swell in the hopes of seeking some shady refuge from their foes. But all they will find will be of the kin. If they are peaceful or have something to trade, then they may be permitted to remain, so long as they do not encroach upon League space. But it is rare to find a pirate lord who will be amenable to such an idea, and so the raiding fleet will often launch an attack upon the Leagues. This, however, is never to be a well-thought-out idea, and more often than not, such a plan will simply lead to the violent deaths of every single marauder from but a short yet unrelenting response. Some of the intrepid explorers, however, should they make it into the core, will hold more of a mercantile mindset, and so long as they remain reasonable in their negotiations, then the kin will be more than happy to strike a deal. Rogue traders, Eldari outcasts, and watercast vessels are well known to traverse the safer passageways of this region to peruse the rare mineral markets of the Leagues.
I mean, yeah, it sounds like as long as outsiders have something of value to trade and do it in a peaceful manner, the Votann are open for them to coming in and doing business.
In response, the kin will happily look over the wares of their visitors, as these deals may be the only opportunity for them to accumulate an exotic artifact from the outer galaxy. Occasionally, Orc freebooters or Deathskull cruisers will charge their way into League territory, always leaving a vile trail of polluted exhaust in their wake. The kin are no allies to the greenskins, but in some rare circumstances, the two factions may strike a quick deal before parting ways. Most of the time, however, their diplomacy will fall apart, often caused by a boneheaded orc repeatedly asking a kin warrior as to why they are such a short Yumi. The craft world Eldari are fairly cordial with the Leagues, but I think that this is primarily due to the lack of contact between the two factions, and perhaps if they were to run into each other a little more often, then they would feel the need to air out their differences. Neither group seems to have engaged in a large-scale battle with the other, and yet the constant arrogance of the craft-worlders is always quite off-putting to the kin. Some of the Eldari have been known...
That sounds like typical dwarf, elf, like hatred things in fantasy, you know? It's always the elves are arrogant and look down upon the dwarves, and the dwarves always hold a grudge against them because of that. You know, that always seems to kind of be the case in these situations.
...to refer to the citizens of the Leagues as the Heliosi Ancients, a name which likely does little more than to irritate the short-tempered kin. Thus far, we have no tales of the Harlequins, nor of the Inari factions making contact with the Leagues. But we do know that most of the kindreds will utterly despise and avoid contact with the Drukhari.
I feel like everyone does.
This is understandable.
I feel like if anyone has any kind of sense, you just avoid the Drukhari at any sense. Like, it's not going to work out. It's just not going to work out with the Drukhari.
For who would wish to make a deal with a group of depraved slavers whose only trade would be of pain and torture?
Yep.
Also, given the nature of the Drukhari, I would not be surprised to hear of a tale where they abducted a group of the kin, or
And
perhaps
so they have a
sought
grudge
to
against
steal
them.
away a crucible, providing them with a limitless supply of clones to use and
True.
abuse.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Having that kind of technology where they could clone things more efficiently than how they have with the homunculus, stuff that goes on with the Drukhari, that would have great value for them to, create more slaves faster. So, and I'm sure, again, the Votann would just hold a grudge against them that, would only expand with time.
This, however, is mere myth for now, as there have been very few tomes and grimoires written on the topic of the Leagues. Perhaps in the near future we will hear more on them, but for now we are forced to work with a fairly limited collection of source material. The Tau are another species which for the longest time also maintained fairly positive relations with the Leagues. Trade deals were often struck, conflicts were typically avoided, and in fact at one point the Tau believed that a prospecting fleet of the kin were of a separate species, who they named as the Demiurge, and their ties became so strong that they were offered to join the Tau Empire as a client species. These kin, however, were content to remain in their current arrangement, where the two groups would routinely trade, whilst also maintaining a healthy distance from one another. Unfortunately, these relations may be at risk of collapsing, as we have noticed a sudden increase in small-scale conflicts fought between the two factions around the fringe region of the Khalnath Expanse, possibly suggesting that a great war may be on the horizon.
Oh, that could be interesting. That could be interesting. A big war breaking out between the Votann and the Tau. That could be interesting. More books, more lore.
The kin do not hold the Necrons to any high regard, and in fact, most of the Leagues will happily set out on a warpath to purge them from their territories. They will typically come into contact during a planet-wide excavation of a slumbering tomb world,
That's
which
what
the
happens
kin
every
will
time.
occasionally target in their constant hunt for resources. Inevitably, their mining equipment will drill through the walls of the Necron tomb complex, forcing the undying legions to be roused from slumber and to defend themselves from the intrusive prospectors. The Tyranids will typically be avoided wherever possible by the kin,
As
and in fact,
everyone does.
they have come to name their entire alien kind simply as the Bane. Apparently, however, there are stories of daring kindreds which have set out to hunt down isolated bioships, with the goal of tearing open their bloated bellies to siphon off any valuable resources which could potentially be found within. As you can probably guess, the Leagues have absolutely zero interest in maintaining any form of contact with the followers of the Dark Gods.
Yeah.
Those who serve chaos are looked down upon in a sense of confused disgust, for how could one so readily give up their soul if the only recompense is madness? It is difficult to define the relationship between the Leagues of Votann and of the Imperium of Man as anything but frosty. The two empires are so vast and yet so disconnected that on one side of the galactic core, they may be embroiled within a brutal war, whereas on the other side, they may be signing a new century-long trade deal.
And I feel like, again, because the galaxy's split in half now, that would only exaggerate that situation, right? We're like, maybe on one side of the galaxy, there's a big war that's going on between the Votann and certain factions, chapters, etc. of the Imperium, where on the other hand, they might have cordial and positive trade relations between them and might even have some kind of certain alliances to work against other races, orcs, etc. I mean, that would make sense. And again, like he says, because both empires are so large, especially the Imperium, you know, and because the Imperium's kind of so disconnected and disjointed from certain ways, and how much bureaucracy there is and red tape going on, that one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing a lot of times in the Imperium, that makes sense.
Let us briefly recall that the kin are indeed the distant cousins of mankind.
Right.
But this familial connection is practically unknown to the Imperium. Instead, they broadly classify the kin as being abhumans of an unknown origin, although most will refer to them as squats, which itself is more of a pejorative slur. Some of the more radical or xenophobic of subgroups, such as would be found within the ranks of the Inquisition or Astartes, are happy to label them as foul Xenos scum, fit only to be slaughtered at the hands of a righteous agent.
Well, and again, I'm sure if the Mechanicus learned about their cores and what they really are and how some of the technologies really run, and with AI, Mechanicus would be up in arms to destroy them, you know, as well. And want to take a lot of their technology to either seal away or study.
I previously mentioned that the kin rejected the concept of the Emperor standing as a deity long ago, which is perhaps the primary reason as to why some within the Imperium see them as faithless mutants who should be punished for their mere existence. But beyond this, they similarly shunned the idea that he was the Omnissiah, and based on what we know of their relation with technology, we could extrapolate that they do not even believe in the existence of a machine god. Naturally,
I mean, technically, one of their AI cores could be considered a machine god, you know?
this puts them at odds with the Adeptus Mechanicus.
Yeah.
The cultists of Mars see the kin as ignorant scavengers who lack any form of respect for the technological marvels which they have come to possess. If they had the chance to do so, the Martians would launch their own expedition into the galactic core to tear apart the realm of these tech shamans and to pry their ancient relics out of their cold, dead hands. But should any other factions emerge within the galactic scene with offers of peace, then the kin will assess their worth, and if profitable, then we can be sure that they will happily sign off on a brand new deal. When it comes to the Leagues of Votann, I believe that we have only just scratched the surface of what there is to truly know. We still only hold fairly limited records of their deeds, and yet even with our limited source material, we have uncovered much as to the nature of their empire. In a few years' time, I can only hope that we receive more tales from the galactic core, as it truly pains me to know that there is an entire empire lurking out in the galaxy that we know so little about. But whilst I have provided a general overview as to their faction today, we will soon need to return to learn of their military might, as the armies of the kin, broadly named as the Kinhost, are nothing short of remarkable. Hardy bands of Hearthkin will advance as an unbreakable battle line, supported by Aina exo-walkers and immense land fortress tanks, surely destined to break their foes apart, as though they were a brittle vein of ore.
I'm down to learn about that.
Will be for another day. And for now, my dearest friends, we have come to our end. Thank you all for listening to this sermon on the Leagues of Votann in its entirety, but I must now close this chapter once more. As always, your support is eternally appreciated, but as I go, I will wish you all with a warm goodbye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Well, there we go. That was the Leagues of Votann, an overview, Warhammer 40k lore by the Scholars of Lore. Links will be down below in the description, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to the Scholars of Lore channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video of his as we went through it, be sure to go over there and give it a like. And if you enjoy the Scholars of Lore content and you haven't hit that sub button on his channel already, do me a favor and hit that sub button on his channel. Show the man some love. Great video. The Votann sound like an interesting faction with a lot of potential to change up the setting and lore on the 40k universe. A lot of things could go in a lot of different ways with interactions with the Imperium and the Mechanicus. Again, you know, learning about, you know, what will the Mechanicus and the Imperium do. They learned that, you know, they have unrestricted AI. Obviously, they would not be cool with that, and it would spark all kinds of, you know, problems between them. But, you know, what were to happen if one of the SDC ships from the Mechanicus were to interface with one of these AI cores? You know, what would that do something, you know, to change relations in certain ways? Would it open the Mechanicus's eyes to other things? Would they think one of these AI cores could actually be the Omnissiah when that changed there? Would they have like a break-off sub-faction of Mechanicus that would want to become part of the Votann to worship their AI cores as the Omnissiah and join them? And, you know, there's any number of things and any number of ways that stuff could play out between just the Imperium and the Votann alone. I think the thing to me that's most fascinating is that the Votann AI cores have an imprint or a presence, whatever you want to call it, in the warp that allow the Votann to navigate and actually map out the Imperium to travel through them. And so, like, what are the implications of that? What does that mean? And the fact that he stated that the Votann soul, through the mutations and evolution and cloning, etc., their souls have become indistinguishable from that of the demons or denizens of, you know, the natural born creatures of the Imperium. So, like, what does that mean? You know, what are the implications of that? Are, you know, the AI cores from the Votann, are they greater demons that have, you know, been brought into and inserted into these AI cores? Or is that just how AI have evolved, right? I don't know, but that, I think that's, out of this video, is probably the thing that is the most interesting and fascinating to me, and the thing that could have the most implications on the setting, you know, is what really are these Votann AI cores? Are they STCs that have been inhabited by chaos demons and enhanced through, you know, through that? And then does that also mean through the cloning process and whatnot that the Votann in general have been changed, their souls have been fused with chaos essence and whatnot? And then would, you know, if the Imperium found out about that, would they just view them as chaos tainted and needing to be wiped out? No other negotiations, no nothing, you know? I don't know. Lots of implications as to what that would mean. I'm looking forward to getting into the next video that he has, where he talks about you know, the various armies and weaponry, etc., of the Votann, and how they work and how the Votann fight, because they essentially, from what it sounds like, they basically still have the same technological kind of advancements that humanity did during the dark age of technology, and they were just spared this AI uprising, potentially through their cores being, you know, infused with this demonic essence or chaos essence, whatever. Maybe that makes them immune to being corrupted, and thus their AI constructs are immune to being corrupted, you know, so they never had to deal with the AI uprising. Which then again, that could also very much benefit the Imperium if they were to somehow allow some of that technology to integrate with theirs. They could essentially inoculate their technology from being corrupted by chaos, which would allow all kinds of technological advancements and things to potentially happen, and would allow the Mechanicus to experiment with things. But with how narrow-sighted and I guess, bogged down by tradition and dogma the Mechanicus are, like, that would probably never happen. And if it did happen, it would be, you know, considered heresy. But I mean, with what's his name out there? What is it, Belisarius Caw? I think he's the Mechanicus who's like basically has free reign to do whatever he wants to, given to him by the Emperor, or supposedly has been given to him by the Emperor. You know, maybe through him that some of this stuff happened. You know, and maybe Gilliman would approve of it, because Gilliman is kind of like, I think, giving him kind of free reign to do whatever he wants to as well. So I don't know, but interesting stuff. Interested to learn more about the Votann and the things they do, and you know, their place in the 40k lore. So like I said, great video by the Scholars Lore. Links down below in the description. Check out his stuff, give the video a like if you enjoyed it, all that kind of stuff. If you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live, we'd love to have you guys come in here, join our conversations. There is a link underneath in the description, as well as a join button underneath the video. So check out the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. I'm going to be adding some more stuff to that soon. You can get early access to videos. You can join us when we do these reactions live and join our discussions, etc., etc. So check all that out, see if it has any interest for you. If you decide you want to take your support to the channel to the next level. Regardless, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed watching and going through it. If you did, consider giving it a like and a subs. It helps me and the channel grow. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day.